Okay, so a little introduction on me. He got his bachelor's degree in economics from Harvard, and he currently works in the Instagram side of Facebook. So he's worked as a program manager at Facebook. Previously, he worked at client operations associate at Avero, and he started off as a product marketing intern at Cognoa. I think that's how you say it. And so that's a little bit about him. Meet, do you want to add anything else to a little bit about your background?
No, I think that that pretty much covers it.
All right, cool.
All right, hi, Meet. So we're gonna start with a little Q&A session. We're just gonna ask you a few questions about, your career path, what exactly you do, and like how can that relate to the goals of our organization. So the first question we're gonna start with is, what exactly is a product specialist? Because we are a mostly UI UX based organization, which definitely has some similarities to product design. So we wanted to know what exactly product specialist means.
Yeah. Do you want to start with the goals of your organization? And I know that you're UI UX, but is that what's the main focus or main mission for everyone who participates?
Yeah. So it's trying to spread the path of UI UX design and human computer interaction, and just spread the knowledge that a field such as UI UX exists, and try to get people to learn all the technologies such as Figma and other technologies that UI UX designers use. Yeah.
Gotcha. Cool. So from my end, to be honest, I wasn't even aware of what a product specialist was until I was one. But it's what I'd say is a luxury that usually you find at large companies when you get big enough, that within different product teams you have very nuanced efforts for creating features and launching them. So my goal specifically is to make sure that whenever we launch something, it's the highest quality product or feature possible. So that basically hinges on two things. One, making sure we're building the right things. So for that, it's a lot of working with, research and really user feedback to understand where the pain points are that we're trying to address, where we need to roadmap next, what we need to build down the road. And so thinking about projects in that space, that's one aspect of it. And then the other aspect is making sure that what we're building is high quality. The thing, again, because this is a large company, everything we ship touches billions of people. So even if there's a small error, that's millions of people that are going to have a sort of poor experience in the app, which obviously we can't have. So there's where you work closely with, design, research again, to make sure that we're sort of addressing all those gaps and have a nice, solid experience for users. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was a great answer to the question. Thank you so much.
So the next question is, how did you come up about this opportunity? Was there, maybe you can elaborate on how you came from a client operations associate and then come to such a big company into a product specialist role?
So one, again, I wasn't really familiar what I was getting into until I was in it. I started out in sort of consulting. So client operations associate was basically me doing consulting in New York for a year. But I wasn't really a fan of it. We had a little bit of a tech arm that I thought was interesting. So I realized I wanted to be in tech. So I made the transition. And the thing you find with large companies is that there are so many different roles, so many opportunities that exist that you wouldn't have otherwise known about or heard about. So that's basically what happened. Is I ended up in a sort of project manager, program manager role at Facebook, and more on the operation side. So it's a lot of understanding once we launch any feature and product, what's the downstream impact on its users. So again, because we're so big, it's a lot of understanding scale. So working with okay, if we launch this feature, how do people abuse it? And if people are going to abuse it, what are the things that we're going to implement to address that? So that's where I was working, and I realized I was very downstream. I wanted to be more upstream, like actually thinking about what we're building and what we're launching rather than just dealing with the
Mhm.
impact of that.
Mhm.
So I was looking for product roles. And at that point, once I had entered Facebook, I realized, okay, I probably want to be a PM.
Nice.
So that's basically the route that I was taking. And without having that experience beforehand, this was like a good opportunity to work in a product team, understand how to ideate and then execute on um,
Mhm.
ideas or features.
Mhm.
So basically end to end. So that's basically how I stumbled upon. It's like a good opportunity for me to get like a comprehensive view of like all the different XFN partners within a product team, what they all do, how they all work together, and how to basically manage that process.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
So our next question is, what skills did you need for this job? So like if any of us were wanting to go into we want to be a product specialist, what would we need to do starting from now? How do we want to build our resumes or portfolios in order to get to where you are?
Yeah. The key is actually just like communication and project management. And it's hard because a lot of these things you don't really get to learn in school. Like I didn't really learn what that means in school, but like how do you work with engineers? How do you work with designers? Like how do you work with different functions? That will come with like practice, but that's like the main thing that you want to think about, especially if you're gonna like start interviewing for these types of roles like right out of school. Is like really think about experiences and internships or whatnot that deal with like project management. A lot of times you'll be asked about like, okay, when you had a conflict with a certain colleague on a certain project, like how do you resolve that? Like those kinds of things. These like soft skills are really what's important, not just in like my role, but like in any role at like a tech company or like especially at like a larger company. You have to be able to collaborate effectively with other people, and you're even evaluated on that. So like working on communication, being able to articulate your thoughts, your ideas, like if you need to push back on something clearly. Yeah.
So regarding your technical skills, were there anything that you have to like work on before you started this job?
Some requirements that like might be in a job description, um, but I found that most people can kind of pick that up as they go. For me, the biggest
Yeah.
thing I needed to know was SQL, and like within a year, I become pretty comfortable and like almost like mastered SQL just by doing it every day, and that's kind of what happens with a lot of people. So that's what I'd say. So people might describe it that way, but just know that I think that most people can pick it up.
Yeah, thank you. That kind of leads into our next question. So
Yeah, I was gonna kind of go off that. Like, what skills have you learned from this job? So you kind of touched on SQL, but was there any other things that you kind of noticed in this industry where you kind of had to pick things up that you probably wouldn't have expected? Because going from a smaller to a larger company such as Facebook, Instagram is kind of a big jump. So maybe you could touch on a few things that you kind of were put on the spot, or you had to kind of learn from scratch or to relearn, maybe even.
Yeah, I think one of the big things again is communication. Um, like if you have experience with a startup, you might understand what it's like to put on multiple hats and like do different types of
Yeah.
things.
Right.
Even in a larger company, especially in tech, like that still can be the case somehow if you want it to be, right? Like I know people
Mm-hmm.
who have shifted from like data engineering to PMs. I know people who have shifted from like PMs to software engineering to like design to like research, right? Like that like avenues and like and like that sort of like structure exists, but the key is like communication, and you sort of learn how to figure out one, like where you want to like go, and two, who do you need to work with, how do you need to communicate, like especially with like leadership. Like that's like a big thing that I had to sort of like pick up. It's like communicating with colleagues is one thing, and then when you're presenting on a project or reporting on something to leadership, that's like a different thing. And all of those things sort of like set you apart. But that's, in
Mm-hmm.
my opinion, like the big thing that like usually catches people's eyes in terms of like skill set is like being able to like communicate and work effectively with other people.
Yeah, definitely. And is there like certain softwares or things that you found more helpful than others in order to kind of communicate well within like your team?
What do you mean by like software, like learning
Or
platforms or
maybe
something?
not software, but like project management tools that you kind of had you've acquired over your time.
So the tricky thing with like Facebook is that we have everything like we use is basically internal. So like we have like build our own
Okay.
project management software and stuff. So on that vein, like I didn't really get a chance to learn a lot of like external tools that exist, right? Like I don't use Zoom or I don't use like Google Slides or Sheets as much, right? Because we use a lot of like our internal stuff. But I wouldn't say that that's like a big thing. I think that one, if you're already in tech, you'll be able to pick up on those little things quickly.
Right.
Um, you actually learn to value like in person or like video call types of conversation and communication actually a bit more.
Nice. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for elaborating.
So you definitely touched on this in the previous two questions about like the soft skills that you have to learn in order to get the job. But like, how did they test those skills in the interview? And do you have any tips for someone who wants to go into a similar field?
Yeah, one is just like have your examples ready, like before you go in any interview, right? Like 3 examples for like in instances or situations where you had to deal with a difficult colleague, situations where you led a project from end to end, right? Like stuff like that. Like have those examples ready because that's what you have to describe, and the way you describe it is what shows off your communication skills. And then also the examples themselves show how well you work with others. But the other big thing is critical thinking, and this will apply across every interview for every role. And basically, what everything boils down to is if you can demonstrate that you can think critically, if you can take a problem, break it down into its small pieces, and like demonstrate that you can logically take a problem and come to a solution. Doesn't have to be the right solution, but you can go through that process. That's the biggest thing, and it'll come up in any interview, no matter what type of role you're going for. And I think that's like probably the biggest thing we value, especially for like my experience interviewing other people for roles at Facebook. That's like the biggest thing that we want to see. And this is where you get like case questions or like scenarios, right? Like if we were launching X, right? Like what's like metrics for success that you might use, or how might you design it in this way to solve what problem, right? So stuff like that.
Yeah, so kind of moving on to what you do now, maybe you can touch on what you do on a day-to-day basis. I know not every day might be the same, but maybe some common things that you find in your role.
Yeah, overall, it's a lot of planning, for next
Right.
month, for next quarter, for the next half. So got to get used to that. But on a day-to-day, it's like, again, a lot of project management. So owning projects, and that might mean owning features or fixes or certain things that we're launching, and being able to see that through, right? So there's a lot of different steps that come into that, right? Like if you're coming up with a feature, you got to get it to design so design can come up with the mocks. And once you get the mocks, you got to take it to Eng so Eng can build it out. And then you got to take it to QA to test it. And then you got to take it to privacy and legal to get approval. So all of that is what basically
Mm-hmm.
goes through, is what day to day looks like, right? It's like driving towards execution. It's very
Yeah.
much similar to what a product manager might do. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's awesome. Okay, next question.
So I know, or I'm guessing the goals of a lot of our like the members of our club, like our end goal is to like work at some big companies such as Facebook. So what is it like working at like a big company such as this one? Like what are the perks? What do you get out of it? Yeah, and if you worked
I
in like a
mean,
smaller company, and like what have you seen similarities
yeah.
and differences?
Um, yeah, so my experience with a smaller company was mainly during like my internship, which was like a 10-person startup. The cool thing I liked about that was like there wasn't much structure. Like I was doing product marketing, but I ended up doing UXR work. I ended up doing design work. Like I actually, that's where I learned Sketch, and I was actually making mocks for our app myself, right? So stuff like that. Like I love like that culture about small companies. Um, of being able to like try different things. You really learn a lot. So it might be a little bit more intense in that way. But outside of that 2-month internship, like I've only ever been with a large company, which I'll say is very comfortable, like free food, things taken care of, like especially times like this where I really don't have to worry, just because I've got like the safety net of a large company. So stuff like that is very helpful. You start to see a lot more structure though with large companies, right? Like there's, like I said, there's so many different roles and that are very nuanced. You are in very specific swim lanes. So it's a little maybe more, you have to think ahead about if you want to try different things. But then again, being at a very large company like Facebook, we also have so many different products and features that almost operate like their own team. So I work at Instagram, and I forget that I work at Facebook sometimes because our building is a much smaller building, kind of separated away from the main campus. So it almost feels like a startup there. So it's like the best of both worlds. But then it really depends on where you end up. You can end up on like the news feed team, and you're right in the middle of being like a big company, right, where decisions are made, not as quickly, or have to go through like a little bit more hoops. But yeah, other than that, I think it's a great starting point. You really learn what makes companies successful, what makes products, features, if you want to be in tech especially, successful. How, like, what are like the good things that you need to keep in mind if like at some point you want to go do your own thing, or if you want to go work at a smaller company. You get to see what already works, and that's pretty valuable.
Right, that's super cool. Thanks for the insight.
Yeah, so this question is why you made the switch between a program manager to a product specialist, but like you kind of touched on before, they're kind of similar. Yeah. But so was there anything that you wanted to maybe elaborate on that made you switch from like that USR side?
That program manager role was more in operations. So like I said, that was a very downstream role. And okay. I wanted to be more upstream. So that was basically my thing, was like working closer within a product team and hopefully being a PM.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that.
So I guess going a little like further back or more into your past, like you started as and I think it was the econ major at Harvard. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how did you get from there to working at Facebook?
Well, I grew up in the Bay Area, so that was one thing, right? You're like surrounded by tech. Everyone's only doing tech. And I wanted to come back to California at some point. And like the best way for me to do that was be in tech. So that was nice. And that's what brought me to like my internship. And then once I did that internship, I was like, yeah, tech's like the way to go, right? Like just the culture, the products, like building something new. I like to leverage like my technical abilities. Like I like to use Python. I like to use SQL when I can. So like that's like a interest / hobby of mine. So being in tech like allows me to like flex that, but also, these soft skills of like working with people and whatnot.
All right. So do you think like certain things you learn in economics at Harvard have like kind of helped with, I don't know, like have they kind of helped with?
No,
like, no,
not at all. Yeah, I mean, I like, again, my major was like very theoretical, so it's a lot of economic theory, which again, it's helpful in one way in that you get to build critical thinking, but you can do that with any major at any school, right? Like that's again like the key thing that you'll get tested on when you like start looking for jobs is like critical thinking. So that's like the best way that maybe my major might have prepared me. But other than that, like specific concrete skills, like I don't think so. Like I would have had to do like computer science or something to like actually have learned stuff that I would utilize.
That makes sense. Back on question.
Back, yeah.
Nope. Back.
There we go. Yeah, so what helped you most when applying to jobs and internships? I know you kind of mentioned maybe like you've learned, maybe started some personal projects maybe, or just maybe some tips for people who don't have much industry experience right now.
For sure. Personal projects are always great, right? I think now you see a lot of people with like portfolios and sites that sort of document what they've been working on.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that'll always be good, especially for UI to be able to have, you know, stuff that you've worked on and then share that. I think a lot of places will like to see a portfolio like that. Maybe not so much in UX, but even then, like being able to have like cases that you've done would be nice. But other than that, I think especially large companies, they still give people the opportunity to enter these roles if they don't have like concrete experience in them, you know, for like a year or whatnot. So for that, I think just like make sure you do your research, right? Like before you're doing an interview or
Right.
before you're applying, like make sure you know why you want to join that company. I think that's like a big question that you can hit on. If you can nail that question of like, you know, why Facebook, I think that always impresses people. So stuff like that outside of like having concrete like portfolios or projects to work on is always helpful.
Yeah. So for you, was there any projects that you did on the side, or uh, like things that you just picked up while in college?
When I was in school, not so much. But I guess you can keep in mind that every experience can be valuable, right? Like I had one like real internship my junior summer, but the summers before that, I sort of traveled and I did like volunteer work abroad and stuff. I think those experiences can be just as valuable, again, because you still learn those same soft skills. So if you can leverage that and like talk about them in a way that highlights like, oh, I learned how to work effectively with people of like different backgrounds and whatnot, that will still be valuable. So that's like kind of where I was coming from. So if you're finding yourself in that position, just know that, you know, just come up with those stories and like think back on that, on like those experiences, that you can still leverage that in recruiting.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, you've definitely touched on this, but what would you recommend specifically to college students to get started in regards to like design, tech, or PM roles? Like, what do you think is the best thing to do to get started if like you don't have anything right now?
Yeah, I mean, for tech in general, definitely like learn about tech. Like, there's so many different like things out there within the tech space, right? Like be on product hunt all the time, like do that kind of stuff of like just like learning about what's out there and like figuring out what interests you. And then two, definitely like if you want to enter sort of like a design field or something like that, like might as well like work on some side projects, like, you know, see what like, you know, you can come up with, create a portfolio. I think that's like definitely, it's um, almost like a thing that everyone has right now, right?
Yeah.
It's like being able to like point to like, okay, here's what I've done, whether it's professionally
Yeah.
or just on the side. So I think that's always good. Probably like what I would have done if I were back in college now, is probably work on something like that. Yeah, I think that would have been like extremely valuable, not only for like immediate like job opportunities, but even down the road, like 5 years, 10 years down, like it's like valuable stuff that you can point to. And who knows, maybe one day you can take that and start a company or something. But yeah. Oh, also networking, right? Like that's
Yeah.
also important.
Yeah.
Just like meet people, meet other people that are doing things that you think are interesting. Reach out to them, talk to people. That's how I ended up at Facebook too, was like you reaching out to an alum who then referred me, right? And I think a lot of that happens. So
So kind of touching on standing out, what's your advice on how to do so, especially in this, you know, whole climate? Everyone's trying to compete for jobs and everything. So any advice on how to stand out?
yeah, one, again, everything that we just talked about, right? Like
Right.
be
Definitely.
able to clearly speak to your experiences, no matter what they are. You know, work on a portfolio or personal projects. Like be able to network. But then the other thing that you'll sort of realize as you start working is that like sort of like personality things can be very valuable. So like, you know, focus on like humility and like portraying that when you're like interviewing or when you're talking to people, and that goes a long way. You'd be surprised at how many people, especially like in the working world, are assholes. And it really rubs people the wrong way. Because the biggest thing is showing how well you can work with other people. So like highlighting those experiences, especially when you're talking to people and like keeping that in mind, is actually super, super valuable. And like in all my interviews that I've done, I've found to be what like has like struck out to the interviewer the most, and like based on their feedback, been something that like, oh, this is something we're really looking for. So
Okay. And it makes sense because you work with a bunch of people on a bunch of projects, so
exactly,
your people skills need to be really good. Yeah, awesome.
yeah.
Okay, cool.
So have you had someone who's like guiding you through this whole process, kind of explained to you, helped you with any questions you had in particular? If so, how'd you meet them?
I do not yet, at least. So no, it was a lot of, for me, it was a lot of just like Google research. I didn't really have someone that had been through like sort of like the same process that I was doing. It was sort of like figuring it out as I went. Leaning on friends and whatnot who might be thinking about similar things, but not like a specific mentor per se. But if you do have the opportunity to have a mentor, I think that's always like super valuable, and something you should definitely leverage.
So you said you reached out to like one of the alumni or someone who already works at Facebook.
Yeah,
Would you say that's helpful? Reaching out to people who already work at the company and the cold
yeah,
calls. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. But it wasn't a cold call because he was like a friend.
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously. Yeah.
So that was a little bit different. But I think yeah, alumni is like, I think you can cold call. I don't think like that's like a big deal, right? Like maybe someone won't respond, but like, hey, you can always find somebody else, right? And if
That
they
doesn't
do,
hurt.
that's like hugely valuable. So yeah, I think that's definitely worth doing.
All right.
So I don't know. Yeah, you might have not done any personal projects you've worked in the past, but maybe you could talk about some of the stuff you did before your time at Facebook, Instagram, and how you leverage those in order to get where you are now.
Yeah. So going back to my my internship, again, like I said, it was like a small company, 10 people. So I got the opportunity to try a bunch of different things, right? Like I did some film editing, and like created this like marketing video for our product because like our website was like super and the conversions were super low for people who were going on the site and then downloading our app. So we were like, we needed something quick to like show people exactly like what the product is and like what we need to like, or how we need to engage them off the bat. Like that was like an idea that I had working there. Wasn't really aligned with what I was doing. And at the time, like it wasn't something that I was capable of doing, or like I would need some sort of end support to actually get that implemented onto the site.
Definitely.
So, but again, because it was a small company, I had the opportunity to like sort of learn and like figure it out myself, which is what I did. And I sort of like spoke to that as I was like going to different interviews, was like, doing something like that, which was like out of my scope. And then, sort of like figuring things out on the way, like being sort of resourceful, and sort of like being a quick learner, and like picking things up like that. Like I think that is an aspect of personal projects that is always like valuable. Showing that you can figure things out. You're not like too reliant on like certain things, and you can like work in ambiguity. That's like a thing you'll probably hear a lot is like, can you navigate ambiguity? This role is ambiguous.
Yeah.
So I think personal projects like that really, really demonstrate that is like, you can take something, have no idea what you're doing, completely blank slate, and like do something with it. So yeah, think about like crafting narratives for that in that way. And I think that would be valuable.
Okay, awesome. Yeah.
So this is our last question in our Q&A session, but we'll have more questions later that a lot of people have been asking on the chat. But for now, if you want to share, are there any projects you're currently working on? I don't know if you can tell us about any like Instagram projects, but
Yeah.
if not, projects you're working on?
For Instagram, we actually just launched a few features this week. It's like the goal is to prevent bullying, but it'll be helpful for a lot of different things. I think it's like stuff that's a long time coming. We created a bulk comment management tool, So if you remember, like if you know, like on Instagram, you can only like delete comments one by one, especially if you're a creator and have a lot of comments. So we created the opportunity to like sort of manage multiple comments at once. That was something that we did just this week. In addition to, I don't know how many of you struggle with this, but now you can finally select who can tag you and mention you and stuff to be only people who follow you. So that was something that my team launched, which is great if you've ever been like in one of those like spam group chats or ever been like tagged with anything that's spam.
Super annoying.
Yeah, super annoying. So that'll work on that. And then we have a bunch of graduation stuff that's going on this week. I don't know if you saw today, we had a live like Facebook graduation ceremony.
I did, yeah.
Like,
So that was really
with
cool.
with a bunch of people. Like hand in hand with that, we have a bunch of like graduation stickers for stories, graduation effects, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's super cool.
That's what's going on this week, at least.
You're like working on stuff and we get to see it like it roll out. It's really cool.
Yeah, I get to see it roll out. I get to see how people receive it. Sometimes well, sometimes they're like, "What is this?" But yeah.
All right, yeah. So that's all we had for our Q&A session. So we're gonna have a short 2-minute break. Yeah, and then
so we'll grab something to drink.
We'll get into resume walkthrough after this. But yeah, for everyone, it is a 2-minute break.
And in the meantime, if you guys have any questions, free to put in the chat or just DM one of the moderators. So yeah, we'll be back.
All right, Yushi, should we? Or is it Yushi? I don't know who it is.
Yeah,
but go ahead, start.
Yeah. Wait, we need to switch the sharing. Groupa, can you go to the next slide and then? Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and do a little resume walkthrough and go through his resume and see like whatever projects and stuff he thought was important to kind of put on there. So if someone can give him sharing privileges so he can go ahead and do that.
Do I have sharing privileges?
I think you should.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, you can go host now.
Yeah.
So, how do I? God damn, I don't know.
Should be a share screen.
Yeah, like a little green thing at the bottom.
Yeah, I've got. All right, I got multiple desktops, so I don't know if I'm sharing the right one. Ah, shit. Grant access. This is gonna make me leave the meeting. All right, I'm gonna have to leave to like grant access from my computer and then call back in.
All right, that's fine.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And Krupa, you might want to stop sharing your screen.
So
right now. Yeah.
All right, cool. Go ahead and like continue putting questions and we'll get to them at the end. If you guys think of anything while we're waiting.
Are people finding this useful so far? I hope so.
Yep.
It's great, bro.
Thanks, bro.
I don't know about the whole verification thing. I don't think that's gonna happen.
I don't know about
Verify
that.
me. Please verify me, boys.
All right. How do I share my screen?
There should be a little green thing at the bottom that says share screen.
I think it says it's disabled at the moment.
Is he the co-host again? Maybe he needs to be.
You might have to redo that.
Sorry, everyone. Technical difficulties.
Oh, there we go. Okay,
All right.
cool. Cool. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So caveat, my resume is built for me going to business school because I'm going to business school in the fall. So I'm not going, so it's like not really for another tech role or for a PM like I initially thought. But yeah, one of the main things that I wanted for my resume was to make it very narrative. And I think that's because I'm not like a recent grad anymore. Like I've had a couple years of work experience and I've kind of figured out not exactly, but like more so than I was when I graduated, what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go, the things that I wanted to share in terms of what I've worked on. So that's why it's like more narrative. I think for maybe you guys, because you're sort of starting out, you might be in a more exploratory phase. It might make sense to be more bulleted and list specific details, given and depending on where you're applying. Potentially for UI UX, I think maybe having a nice sort of like format, clean, easy to read, narrative way might be helpful. I don't think I'm the best person to answer that question. It could be good to touch base with other people who are in that role, specifically for that. But yeah, so for me, again, I listed my projects in more of a sort of higher level narrative space. So it doesn't really specifically talk about me doing this and resulting in this, which is sometimes what a lot of people like to see, especially if you end up in something more analytical. Like if you're working in operations as an analyst, that might be something that you might lean more towards. But me being, hoping to be in roles that are more focused on relationships and working with people, and being able to manage projects and manage teams, I sort of kept it more qualitative and narrative based. So I listed out my experiences here to the left, have my education, my strengths, again, quickly highlighting like one, I work effectively with like cross-functional partners. The ambiguity thing is like a good thing to highlight, especially if like you're someone that's working with personal projects and stuff. Like that's a great thing to highlight. For me, because I worked in operations, I talked about how I'm good with like scaling out processes and programs, right? Creating something and then making it serve a billion people. That's like an experience that's like unique to being able to work at a large company. And then again, I like to work with technical stuff like SQL, Python, whatnot. So I listed that as a strength. And so that and my skills, just quick, this, I would say, again, depending on the type of role you're applying for, but I think with a UI UX focus, it's always nice to list the tools you're proficient in, right? Because that tells a recruiter or whoever's interviewing you or a hiring team how much they need to invest in your onboarding and your ramp up, right? Like if you already know Figma, if you already know Sketch, like that like makes the onboarding that much more easier rather than you having to learn a completely different tool. So that's always nice to list. And then hobbies and interests, just to show that you're a person, right? List what's interesting to you. Again, this like goes back to the thing I said about humility, is just like be who you are, right? Like show that, demonstrate that to people, that you're just someone that's going to come into this team, get along with people, and be just like a good person, a fun person to work with. And that will go a long way. So that's why I put this. It's really not relevant to anything. Like my interest in astronomy has nothing to do with anything, but just shows that there are other sides to you as a person, which is important. Any questions? I don't really know what else to talk about here, but so just if you have questions, just point me to that.
Let me see if there's any questions in the chat about resume. Yeah, just like if anyone wants to type in the chat any questions specifically about his resume, and then we'll get to the other questions that everyone has. I think or we can like bring them up later too. I think he did a really good job of like explaining all the different parts. So.
So good. So I can stop sharing.
Yeah, I think you're good. I think you can stop sharing. And then Krupa, can you start sharing?
And turn on your video, Krupa.
Okay, now the moderators are going to go through the different questions that everyone's been having.
So someone asked, what is the typical length for a project to be finished on your end? Do you juggle multiple projects at a time?
Juggle multiple projects at a time. Yes, all the time. But you don't necessarily have to. I think you can take one big like meaty project and like deep dive in it and just like really focus on that. You can take a bunch of smaller projects and work on them together. You kind of have to be aware of your own bandwidth. No one's going to really tell you do this, this, and this. That's the thing you'll find probably at any tech company. You sort of have to figure it out yourself, or at least in my opinion, I think in a good workplace, right? Like you have the, sort of the autonomy to understand like how much work you can take on. So around that, yes. But again, you can balance that out yourself. And I don't think people would be upset if you're not doing multiple projects at once. And then how long a project takes, again, it depends on what the project is. So like for us, if we're launching like a completely new feature, right, that requires investment from all partners, so like design, research, and like if we need to research something to figure out what exactly we need to build, and if we need to go to design to get the mocks, and then if we need to build it, how, depending on how much like engineering capacity we have, like how many people can work on it, all those kinds of things basically determine how long a project can take. So it can be something that's as simple as like changing the copy on a specific screen, right? Which might take a month or a few months. You just need to have someone who works in content like come up with something else, and then don't really need any design there because nothing is changing in terms of like the design of the screen or of the app. So that can be done relatively quickly. But then again, if you're launching something completely new, it requires a lot of stakeholders. Goes back to being able to work with different people. You got to be able to manage, working with all those different partners. Sometimes things might get delayed, whatnot, but yeah.
That makes sense, yeah. Another question someone had is, has LinkedIn been particularly helpful for you while building a solid network? Do you have any tips of getting the most out of it?
It's more helpful to me now than it was a couple of years ago, like when I was coming out of college. I think that might have been because like adoption of LinkedIn has now grown in the past couple of years, more so than it was in the past, or it might have just been that it wasn't as helpful. I'm not quite sure yet which one's the case. But now I find it to be definitely very helpful in terms of reaching out to recruiters and the hiring process. I think a lot of, at the time when I was recruiting for jobs out of college, a lot of my recruiting happened like within my university. So I didn't really go on LinkedIn as much for that purpose. But now I think almost everyone posts their jobs on LinkedIn. So that in itself is like a huge reason to have a good LinkedIn presence and leverage that a lot. Like you can like reach out directly to recruiters and stuff, which I found to be valuable. So now more so than ever, yes. So definitely worth investing in a good LinkedIn presence.
Okay, that makes sense. Cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, so someone else asks, in terms of career growth, where do you want to see yourself in the next 10 or 15 years, and how do you plan on getting there?
Yeah, so I'm off to business school this fall. Right now I'm thinking I want to do something on my own. So it'll give me 2 years to sort of try my hand at entrepreneurship, meet some people, hopefully people who can give me money to do something, and try that out, and in like a very controlled environment. And if that works, then hopefully continue doing that. I think that's something that's like fulfilling to me, is like not having to work at like a company, but like being able to work on what I want. But if not, I think I definitely like to stay in tech, and maybe shift to more of the product management side, maybe work my way up into some sort of leadership role. within product. At the moment, that's what I'm thinking, but that can all change.
Yeah, that sounds super cool. So someone else asked, what's the most challenging or stressful project that you've been a part of?
Challenging or stressful? Probably. I don't know if I can even think of like a specific thing, but most projects have tended to be challenging or stressful in some way or another. Whether it's because you know, I didn't represent myself appropriately in front of leadership, whether it's something that's like on a super time. Well, actually, I know a good example is I worked on the elections team within Facebook. So basically in 2018, when we were really like having to ramp up our efforts for preventing people from interfering with our elections and like building out all of our tools and resources to maintain election integrity. That was like a completely new thing. No one had ever worked on it before, like in any company, in any industry. So having to figure out all of that, especially like a very short period of time, was very intense and stressful. So yeah, but again, each project has its own challenges and stress, whether it's like time, ambiguity, not enough support from your manager, maybe cross-functional partners are not being easy to work with, stuff like that.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Nidhi asked, if you could hire one person to join your team, what would you look for in a candidate?
Like so, like for my role, like for the team that I'm on.
Yeah, I'm assuming so.
Okay. Probably critical thinking. Someone who's a good problem solver. Again, because problems are ambiguous. No one's going to tell you this is what you need to work on. So you kind of have to be able to figure it out and then come up with solutions. So I think someone who can do that well would definitely be a good value add.
Totally. And then Nicole asked, tips on handling stress while working on a project.
Talking to your manager or your colleagues is definitely encouraged a lot, especially at Facebook. Honestly, you want to work obviously at a place that has that sort of culture. So being able to bring that up to people, especially a manager, and like hopefully having the opportunity to take some things off your plate or sort of like work through other ways to maybe build resiliency, which is a big thing. It's like probably the most valuable thing that I found is like having something to immediately turn to.
Yeah, so someone else asked, how do you assess critical thinking?
A couple ways. One is how you can break down a problem. So that is essentially logic, right? Like being able to be very rational about like taking a problem and breaking it down into its smaller pieces, right? Like if the problem is we just launched Messenger in some country Y, no one's using it, right? That's like the problem you're given. Like what's like the actual problem you can break that down to? And so like articulating that is very, very crucial. So that's like one piece. And the second piece is like you might be able to do that in your head, and then communicating that clearly is like a whole other thing. And like walking your interviewer or someone else through that is just as valuable. So those are two things that are very important to critical thinking.
All right, I think we're out of cues and almost out of time, so we can wrap it up. Thank you so much for coming to everyone, and Meet, thank you so much for doing this event with us. I hope it helped people out. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. Hope it was helpful.
We'll also be releasing, just want to mention that we'll also be releasing the slides so everyone can have a chance to look over, and this will be uploaded on our YouTube channel in the near future as well. So thanks again, Meet. Really appreciate it.
Sweet. Yeah, for sure. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, if anyone has any last minute questions, do they want to feel free to let us know. Otherwise, everyone else is free to go. And like we said, we'll follow up with all these slides and videos on our platforms coming soon. So yeah.